Hi, I have been wanting to do a live sketching session, and I also wanted to answer a question that was asked by a designer friend who was asking what makes for a good concept sketch. So I wanted to show some real quick examples, and then I also wanted to get into some drawings. These are all projects that I've done personally that aren't necessarily under NDA, and the question was, you know, what is the best way to sketch and how is the best way to depict something that is going to best communicate your concept? And I don't think there's any set rules as to how you go about and you sketch something to communicate it. My sort of thought is that whatever you decide to do as your sketch needs to communicate as best as possible the ideas that are in your head, and more importantly than just sort of showing off your ideas, communicating in a way that will communicate to the people who are going to be responsible for building it. So other than just being a nice drawing, it needs to also say things about how it sits in space, what its scale is, what it might be like to experience it, and even if it includes, you know, sort of little notes and information that's going to help someone better understand it, you know, sort of so be it. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of my process and some of the tricks and techniques that I use when doing a sketch. Although I'm doing a lot more digital stuff of late, I am actually sketching more than I think I ever have before, because a lot of the beginning of the project is coming up with the rough drawings that eventually get communicated to the people who are going to be building them in 3D. So these are just some examples of sketches I've done in the past, all meant to be sort of vignettes that help describe how something looks, how it might work, and any additional notes that might help figure out what details might not be obvious in the sketch itself. So one of the examples that I want to use is the question was posed, what's the best way to do a vignette so that it communicates the most information? And one way to do it is through an elevation, just a flat-on elevation. These are probably the easiest drawings to do because they don't have a lot of complex perspective. The information is really, really fast to sketch out, and whether you're doing an architectural elevation or you're doing a vignette, the question that was posed to me was specifically about vignettes for a museum display. And so this example drawing isn't of any specific display that I'm attempting to communicate, other than I just put a lot of objects that would help communicate the idea. So this is a flat-on elevation, and these are fast and easy. The drawing can be nice and it can communicate information, but another way that you can take the same information is then to do one that is in perspective. This is the same subject, except it is now, I basically left the world of the flat-on elevation, and now I'm adding perspective lines. And as you can see, although it depicts the same environment, there's a little bit more information in here. The chair feels like it's sitting in space, the same with these objects here. And also I'm starting to be able to see things that you can't see in the flat elevation, like the floor, that there's a carpet here you can't see here, the kind of treatment that's happening on the floor. So if it's a very quick job and I just need to really, really quickly figure it out, I'll lean towards front elevation. But if I want to start getting into how these things sit on it and try to communicate its scale, then I'll go for something more in perspective. Going back momentarily to this elevation, the advantage to this is that, like an architectural drawing, you can actually add measurements that could be measured off of it. So that's an advantage. But while that's good for finding out dimensions, the sense of dimensionality doesn't happen until here. Now, I'll do one or the other, but actually my favorite way to depict something is to depict it in 3/4 view, because I think that starts to create a better sense of depth and how something fits in space. And for this particular one, I actually built a really rough SketchUp model of the same scene. This is the scene that's drawn in these two drawings, except I've taken the camera and I've given it a three-quarter perspective. And what I'll do is that I'll just make a quick sort of screen grab of the model from the perspective that I like, and then I'll bring it into Photoshop, and then I will take and turn the lines into red, and then I will really, really lighten it. I don't even know if you can see this. It's probably very, very faint. It'll give me a pure red underdrawing that then I can sketch on top of. Now, I could just take this drawing, put it on a light box, put a piece of paper on top of it, but I found it's even faster if I can print out something with a red base. And the reason I do this is that when I was at WDI, across the street was the animation department, and they used both red and blue pencils in their sketches, because once the sketch was done and inked, they could bring it into a computer, onto a Xerox machine, and zero out the color and leave just the line. So if you look at many of my sketches up close or in person, like I don't know if it's visible in here, but there's actually a very faint red drawing underneath it, and that's my pencil drawing. I've erased most of the red, and then the rest of the red I'll take out in Photoshop. So then I can take a red pencil and I can start to start figuring out the dimensionality and the sort of the quality of the line. So I'm going to put a piece of paper under there just so I don't have to fight with the wood grain on this table. So I'm just going to use this red pencil and just start to hand draw over the SketchUp model. And really what it's doing is it's freeing me up from having to ever think about or worry about the perspective of this drawing. I can't tell you, leaving illustration school, how much stress there was around making sure your perspective lines are right. And mathematically it might be right, but there just seems to be something off about it. By taking the time to build this really rudimentary SketchUp model underneath, it allows me to really, really focus on the line quality and less on the whether my perspective lines are right. So I'm just going to start sketching out this red sketch. I've already drawn this twice now for the other examples, so I really kind of know where I'm going with the details. Now technically I could probably just take ink and draw right on top of the model, but this pencil phase gives me the opportunity to add just a little bit of nuance to it that then I can firm up when I get into doing the final line work. Now I don't do this modeling for every design. In fact, the really rough stuff I don't really worry about building a SketchUp model. The advantage of the SketchUp model is that because I built it in an architectural 3D modeling tool first, I know the scale of everything. I've actually have a real clear idea of what the dimensions are. And when I'm handing this off to the people who are going to build it or are going to do the show set drawings based upon it, I know that they can pull those measurements and create something that will live in the physical world that will be realistic. Drawings can cheat a lot, especially that front elevation. You can kind of get away with drawing something that looks like it works, but when you go to actually measure it out and figure out the dimensions, it does not necessarily. And there's some unpleasant sort of surprises along the way. I'm also cheating a lot. I'm kind of ignoring some of the stuff that's happening in the SketchUp model and starting to add my own bits and pieces as I go. little bits of detail that I can firm up in my pen and ink sketch. Sometimes just drawing is enough of an enjoyable experience, that what you're drawing isn't necessarily always as important, because a lot of the thinking has already been done in the model. And now I can really think about how I want to represent this dimensionally. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with the other two ways of depicting it. It's just that I feel that this one gives a lot more information about how this sits in space. I'm not worried about whether or not people can take dimensions off of this sketch, because I have the model. I can give them the model and they can find the dimensions that way as well. And since the sketch is going to be viewed by people other than necessarily other artists, I feel that it's easier for them to kind of understand what this will look like when it's finished in a way that the elevations don't necessarily communicate. There's also details like this mantelpiece that I made a little too thin in SketchUp. I'm going to fatten it up just to make it more approachable and friendly. Do the log in the fireplace. So these pieces aren't great works of art. In fact, you want them to be as charming as you can make them. You want it to look fun. People are potentially going to decide whether they're going to do this based upon the sketch. But in the end, if they choose to work on it or build it, you want them to understand what it is they're building. I've often said too that sometimes my job is to draw something so that we all agree that's not what we want to do. That's something that seems like a really good idea. Once you depict it, there might be, maybe there's another way to go that's different, but you wouldn't have known it if you hadn't done the sketch. So I don't have a lot of preciousness when it comes to this particular idea being the winning one. It's more trying to pour as much information and charm and potentialness into the sketch so that it helps sell the idea to the team, to the client, to the fabricators, so they understand. Because I've done a model as well, I've also got information that could help in other aspects, whether we build a physical model. We have the dimensions already. We know it will fit in the space. And also we could do a digital model that we could experience either through renders or through VR. So this red line drawing is meant to be nothing more than a scaffolding to inform what I'm going to do with the line work once I get my pen out. So I'm not worried about being super accurate. I can get tighter when I get in with my pen. I'm also looking at my older versions to see what choices I made on the elevation and the perspective drawing that could help inform this sketch. Okay, let's do these guys. Okay, so I think that's enough information in the pencil. And now I can start tightening it up. I use a bunch of different things. One of my favorites is the Pentel Stilo. It used to be called the Pentel Fountain. I'll also use a brush pen, especially when I'm doing organic shape like trees and characters and so on. But in this one, I think I'm going to just stick with the Pentel. And so this is just a matter of me tightening up those rough red line drawings. Something else that's happening as I'm getting older is that my hands get more tired faster, and sort of my ability to draw one of those sort of surgically straight lines is waning. It's just a reality of getting older, I'm guessing, and having drawn for a lifetime. So I'm pretty forgiving about the line. As long as it communicates the idea, then I think I'm fine. Also, I'm not terribly worried about this being a fantastic work of art. You know, there are concept designers that do just beautiful, beautiful finished pieces. And the odds are that this piece will only be seen internally by the handful of team members that are working on the project, not necessarily the public. Very seldom does concept work get to be seen. There's usually a big concept painting or a handful of illustrations that are used to sell a project. And these sketches will end up in a drawer, or more often than not, they're just a means to an end. So of the hundreds of drawings you might produce for one particular project, maybe a fraction of them are the ones that are actually informing the final artwork, the final piece. It was at one point pointed out to me that I hold my pen really funny. Partially, I think, because I'm left-handed, but and at some point someone showed me a photograph of me holding a pen, and I realized, oh my God, I do hold it funny. So a concept sketch is also just shorthand for materials and understanding how things are fitting in space. So I'm not trying for super realistic, much more me trying to communicate what's going on spatially and what materials are potentially being used to make, like that stool is a little wooden stool, or how plush is the chair. think also because I'm left-handed, I shift the drawing around. Whatever angle is going to make it easier for me to produce the line. Another favorite pastime is sitting with either a laptop or an iPad open and then doing like a Google image search or living in Pinterest for a morning. And then I'll certainly grab images for reference, but even more fun is to sketch right there on a sketchbook or a piece of paper the details I'm seeing. I tend to retain those details when I sketch much more than if I grab an image. I make realizations about how things are constructed in a ways that a photograph won't necessarily communicate. And if I'm doing a theme, like I'm doing a blacksmith shop or I'm doing something historical, I'll start to make observations about how many things are influenced by the way things were constructed in that time period that will help make educated or somewhat educated choices about designing things that I'm not finding reference for. So if I see a couple of tables that have a certain way in which they construct the legs, or the carpenters have built out that furniture, if I'm asked to do a piece of furniture I don't have reference for, I have a better idea about how other furniture pieces were constructed, so I can sort of make a guess as to how I could build this one piece I don't have reference for. So if this was an actual, real museum display, I would hope there'd be some more purpose to it other than me just sticking a chair in front of a fireplace. Any opportunity that you can suggest that life is happening is good. You know, somebody's reading a book in front of the fire. Maybe they're making soup. Speaking of soup, I forgot the ladle I put in the other sketches. Reading lamp. Okay. A little bit looser with these stones. Now this is only going to be a black and white sketch, so whenever possible, any information that I can communicate through the line quality is important. If I decided later that I wanted to color this, I could scan it as it is, as a line drawing, and I could bring it into Procreate or bring it into Photoshop with the Wacom tablet, but more often than not I use Procreate now just because it's so convenient. And I either could just color in behind the line work that I'm doing here, but if I'm going to go into Procreate, sometimes I'll just scan in the red drawing, line drawing, make it a layer, and then do the line work in Procreate, mainly because unlike my now somewhat shaky hand, it's a lot less shaky on the iPad, and I can get these sort of really buttery lines I use that in character stuff a lot. Also, the big bird's eye illustrations that I tend to do a lot of, I will do the red pen drawing on paper, scan that in at a really high resolution. So although the iPad is only like 9 by 12 inches, about the size of a sketch pad, I can really, really blow it up in Procreate and get in and noodle the color with all the Photoshop layers intact. And I can do all that from my sofa at night. And since coloring is often a kind of and even the line drawing, once the information is figured out, is kind of pleasantly mindless. You know, you're making a million little decisions as you're drawing as to what you're doing with the pen and what you're doing with the colors, but it's more relaxing and meditative, and it allows for something like the television to be on, where you're sort of half paying attention to it and half paying attention to your drawing. Another wonderful thing to do, especially when doing line work or color, is to get a book on tape or listen to a podcast, because often without those things, it can seem like it takes a really long time to finish a piece. But if you're listening to something, you all of a sudden you look down, your book on tape's over or your podcast is over, and you've made a huge amount of progress, although you didn't realize you were doing it at the time. I remember my father used to commute in the Bay Area some 40 miles or so, and some days he would remember leaving work, and then he would remember pulling up into the driveway. He was lost in his thoughts, and sort of the drive was autopilot, which can be scary, but it also suggests that you've done it long enough that you just sort of biologically know how to get home. It's kind of like the horse that returns to the stable. So these line drawings can be kind of like that, where I kind of know where I'm going with it, and it's just a matter of getting in there and going. So hopefully this process isn't too tedious to watch. If it is, feel free to fast forward to the end. It's also worth noting that this process happens fairly quickly, partially because I've been doing it for a long time, but mostly it's because so much of the thinking has already happened before I started drawing. The other advantage to doing this 3/4 view is that things that just feel like they make sense and work in the elevation, all of a sudden you realize maybe don't work so well when you see it three-dimensionally. Some days it confirms it works great, but where this chair felt really, really dominant in these other versions, because I'm seeing it from this other angle, it doesn't feel like it's as big, although I guarantee it's the exact same size that's depicted in the other images. So if I was to do the sketch again, I might consider making it a little bit bigger because of that. I also might want to go into VR and just check out the model. Since the SketchUp model is done, you know, even and it's really, really loose, raw form, I can jump into the Quest and VR Sketch and just have a walk around it just to make sure that the shapes are working. And I might even do that before I do this sketch just to be really doubly sure that my dimensions are working. I did not do that here. Okay, gotta get this. Ellipses are super hard to do well. So I kind of just give myself a break, do my best. This is just a concept sketch after all. Okay, so, but all the basic lines are done. I'm just going to go in here and add a little bit of additional shading just to help drop certain things back a bit. I did the same thing in the other two sketches. Maybe to suggest this fireplace goes back in space a little bit. And then just so it's not just a complete pen and ink, just lines, I'm going to add a little bit of shading to this cauldron. So it has a little bit more weight in there. Now let's say that this drawing is approved and then they want to go further with it. I can then choose to bring it into Procreate and do a color version of it. I could do a version that ignores the lines and is just a painting of it with even more detail, wood grain and things like that. Or I could bring it into 3D and do a textured model. Let's do a little wood grain on the floor. Just enough to then maybe a little on the base. A bit of nicks in the wood, so it doesn't look like it just came from the lumber yard. Okay, and I think I colored this guy in. And this pillow too, I think I did. Okay, let me just look it over, see if I forgot anything. If there's any opportunities for me to add any more noodly details that weren't in the other two drawings. That's pretty much it. Oops, nope, gotta add this. Okay, enough. Whoops, no. The artist's prerogative is to noodle continuously. Okay, and so I have the red pencil drawing on there, don't need that anymore. And to make it easier for me to remove in Photoshop, I'm just going to lightly use a kneaded eraser and just remove as much of the pencil part as I can. I have to be delicate because if I get too heavy-handed, I will wrinkle, tear, bend, fold the paper in a way that I've done way too many times. Okay, so we've got even more of this. Wherever you've been heavy-handed, like I was on that log, it takes a little extra erasing. So we had where'd it go? We had the SketchUp model underneath, which is sort of my underdrawing, and that red printed line didn't erase, but it's so light that if I bring it into Photoshop and I select red and then zero it out, it will go completely away. And you can see in comparison the three sketches, if I can get them all on here. Like I said, there's no wrong way to do concept sketches, but it's worth noting what's more successful about each. The elevation was probably the easiest to do. It is scalable. I could take a ruler if I did it in scale and figure out the dimensions. This one's giving me a little bit more information. It's letting me see the floor surface, but it is not helping me understand where it lives in space. And then finally, there's this sketch, which is usually my default place to go, which is to create a three-quarter view that really helps me understand how it fits in space. And likely this is the sketch I would go with when I presented it. And now I don't always do a model, sometimes I just freehand it, but this seemed like a good opportunity to show that technique. So thanks for following along, and have a wonderful time sketching. If it's not fun, then you need to do a lot more of it until it's just a complete pleasure just to draw things for the act of drawing it. Thanks a lot.